This border crisis is unfortunately one of many crises that we're seeing from this Biden administration that they refuse to confront. And the border crisis is a clear example of a catastrophe that was created by President Biden's own actions that can only be fixed by President Biden, and he could fix it today. The fact that Vice President Harris refuses to do her job and go to the border shows you that they know how bad it is, and she doesn't want to see it so that she can try to deny it exists. But it's real. When she was asked just the other day by Lester Holt, after she tried to insinuate that she's been to the border, which is not accurate, he challenged her on it. He said, no, you haven't been to the border. And then she just gives this bizarre laugh and says, well, I haven't been to Europe either. I don't know if Vice President Harris understands the crisis is not in Europe, it's at America's southern border, and she and President Biden created it. They could fix it today if they just reinstated those policies that were working. Remain in Mexico was an agreement President Trump had actually negotiated with the president of Mexico, and it was controlling our southern border. The wall, the barrier, if President Biden doesn't like President Trump, he can call it something different, but it was working. The agreement with the Northern Triangle countries were working, and he reversed all of those things to devastating consequences. If you wonder how bad it is, just look at what happened over the weekend. McAllen, Texas elected a Republican mayor. This is a heavy Democrat city right on the front lines. I know when I went a few weeks ago and brought 10 members of the whip team with me to the southern border at the Rio Grande, we were in McAllen, Texas. And it's probably the worst example of where President Biden's policies have failed people on the ground. But look at what they did. They just elected a Republican mayor who promised to get tougher on the border. This isn't just a Republican issue. There are Democrats as well that demand that we get control over our southern border. President Biden will not confront this issue, and Vice President Harris is nowhere to be found. She needs to do her job and get down to the southern border. And then more than that, she also needs to work with President Biden to correct the problems that they created. Unfortunately, they've created a lot of other problems. Just today, the Consumer Production Index came out this morning, and we saw a 6.6% increase. That's the largest increase ever. Families all across America are seeing inflation. Unfortunately, it's here, it's real, and it's getting worse. If you're a family today, you're paying about 45% more at the pump for gasoline than you were a year ago. Futures for oil today just hit around $100 a barrel. OPEC is now relevant on the world market again as a cartel because President Biden shut down American production. Elise talked about it. Chairman McCall talked about it. But think about this. On day one, President Biden killed the Keystone Pipeline, crushing thousands of American jobs and undermining our relationship with Canada. This is Canadian oil that was going to be coming down to America, creating American jobs to refine that oil in America. And President Biden said no to that. But then literally days after Russians hacked our pipeline in the Northeast, President Biden gets a financial gift to Putin by allowing and greenlighting the Nord Stream pipeline between Germany and Russia. And so it is just perplexing to see that President Biden said no to American energy jobs and American pipelines, but yes to Russian jobs, Russian pipelines, and Russian dominance over our allies. This is real dangerous policy that's happening right now before our very eyes that President Biden has created. It's why families are paying more at the pump. His policies are why today, if you buy a new home, you're paying over $30,000 more for that home than a year ago. President Biden needs to be working with Congress to fix these problems. You don't see a bill on the floor this week or next week's schedule to address any of these crises that we've talked about, to stand with Israel. Why won't President Biden stand up to the anti-Semites in his own party? You're seeing this big fight within the Democrat Party right now over anti-Semites and whether they're going to stand up and confront this problem. It's a real problem. It's yet another crisis that they refuse to confront. But we're going to continue to call them out, and we're going to continue calling for actual oversight. Think about this. Just a few weeks ago, we saw this data dump of emails, and we've been calling for over a year for an investigation into the origin of the coronavirus. Many of us, in fact, if you look at headlines from a year ago, they were saying it was a conspiracy theory to suggest that COVID-19 might have started in the Wuhan lab. And many of us were suggesting that we should investigate it because we were getting reports that it may have started in that lab. We didn't know definitively because we couldn't get anybody to talk about it. Do you know to this day, Speaker Pelosi still refuses to have a hearing into the origin of COVID? We had a moment of silence yesterday for 600,000 American lives lost. And yet, Speaker Pelosi, with her majority and multiple committees of jurisdiction that are standing today that could do this, have yet to have a single hearing on the origin of a virus that killed over 600,000 Americans. Why is Speaker Pelosi covering for the Communist Chinese Party? We're calling on Speaker Pelosi to have hearings now on the origin of COVID. Let's look at what we know from the emails. Let's look at what our scientists may have found out talking to Chinese scientists in the Wuhan lab before evidence might be destroyed, if China hasn't already destroyed evidence. We ought to be getting answers to these questions, but for whatever reason, they continue to cover for China's failures. And so we're going to continue pressing for answers on these tough questions. I'm sure you have a couple of questions too, and we'll be happy to take them.
Thanks, sir. I wanted to ask if you all are planning to introduce a resolution to strip Congresswoman Omar of her committees, or if you guys are going to support this censure resolution that some of your colleagues have put together.
As Leader McCarthy has talked about, we're keeping all the options on the table. Clearly, you're seeing a number of pieces of legislation. I think you're seeing some internal conversations on the Democrat caucus side. Frankly, they should be the ones to take actions to police their own members, but they're having that internal fight. We're looking at options on our side right now.
Thank you so much, sir. Eric Rosales, EWTN, the Catholic Channel. One of the measures that's not in the Biden proposal is the Hyde Amendment, and 4 Democratic senators have in fact supported the Hyde Amendment. They've come out and they said so. Is that promising, and your reaction to the Hyde Amendment not in the budget?
We are going to fight with everything we have to preserve Hyde protections. This has been a bipartisan agreement going back to the 1970s when Henry Hyde first put limitations on taxpayer money being used to fund abortion into appropriations bills. And then it started with one bill, and then the next year he brought it to a few more, and ultimately it became part of any spending bill that you would have a protection that taxpayer funds would be used to fund abortion. And you're seeing President Biden trying to chip that away. They did it in the last non-COVID bill, the spending bill that spent over $1 trillion, did not have Hyde protections. But we're going to fight to ensure that any spending bill that moves through Congress continues to maintain the bipartisan, respected Hyde protections, and this will be a big fight.
Do you think pro-life Democrats are afraid to speak up?
Well, you haven't seen any pro-life Democrats on the House side. And what I say by that is we have a bill called the Born Alive Act, Ann Wagner's bill that there's a discharge petition on now. That bill would say that if a baby's born alive outside the womb, now we're talking after the baby has come out of the womb alive, in some states they're killing that baby and calling it abortion. That's murder. And yet it's happening in some states. And so this bill would just protect the lives of those who are born outside the womb. Not a single Democrat will sign on to that discharge petition. So I don't know how anybody can call themselves pro-life and not demand that the Born Alive Act come to the House floor.
You've said that there is a national security crisis, a border crisis, an energy crisis, a budget crisis. You said that anti-Semitism in the Democratic ranks is a crisis, and you've also mentioned inflation as a crisis. Do you worry that your message is a little bit over the top and that you might be actually confusing voters right now?
I wish there weren't so many crises, but unfortunately they're all real, and they're all being caused by President Biden's actions. You know, look at the worker shortage. Right now, we have millions of job openings in America, over 9 million job openings, and President Biden's objective is to pay people not to work. It's one of the reasons we have a supply chain backup. It's one of the reasons that families are paying more for everything they buy when they go to the grocery store, when they go to the pump, when they try to buy a new house. Just think about this. Used cars today are up 30%. And President Biden isn't confronting any of these. I wish we didn't have any of these crises. But he's created them. You've seen the actions he's taken. We've pointed them out. We've offered to work with him, by the way, to solve any of these crises. And he refuses to do that. His own vice president won't do the main job she was appointed by him to confront at the border. So why they are both creating these problems and crises and not solving them is a mystery to me, and I think it'd be a valid question to ask them.
With all due respect, you've seen war. You've seen the nation teetering toward war. You've seen the attacks of 9/11. You've seen what the nation feels like when it is really in crisis. Do you think that the nation feels that way right
I've
now?
never said this was war, but I'll tell you, if you look at what's happened in Israel, they've faced thousands of rocket attacks into Israel. The Iron Dome, which is it's a great American partnership with Israel, and it's worked incredibly effectively. You've got many in the Democrat Party on the House floor that are encouraging President Biden not to help Israel replenish their supply of missiles, not to fire at Gaza, but to fire into the air to take out the missiles that Hamas terrorist organizations backed by Iran and other proxies are firing into Israel. And why won't he answer that? It's a basic question. Will you stand with Israel's right to defend themselves? And so, if you don't view those as crises, maybe we differ. Again, that's not war in America, but clearly if you ask someone in Israel, they feel like they're under attack. And they want to see their allies, especially America, having their back when they're under attack by terrorist organizations. Yeah.
I have a question for Congresswoman Stefanik. As a member of Intel, do you have any concerns with reports that the Trump-era DOJ seized records from members of Congress and reporters? And would you want to see Sessions and Barr come testify?